I was in Lanzarote in the last couple of weeks, and I got to use a Decathlon Elops e-bike on a few occasions, and I'm going to use that as the basis of whether or not you could use this particular bike for e-bike touring.
So I'm on a break in Lanzarote where a friend has rented an e-bike, and I thought I might answer the question is, could you tour on this? Now the reason I'm doing that is because it's one of the cheapest options you can get. It's a Decathlon Elops, and it costs about a little over €1,000 typically. So in comparison with my own bike, it's almost a third of the cost. And the question I'm asking is, could you use it for touring rather than should you use it for touring? Because I think the answer to the should question is probably no. If you can afford it, you should get a better bike. But, you know, often funds are tight and people need to use what they have, or something that will, you know, function for other things, or just that's what they have. So let's think about that could question and look at the different features of the bike. So let's look at the features. So the first thing is there isn't a crossbar, so there goes any hope of a crossbar bag that reduces what you can carry. However, you can attach a handlebar bag pretty obviously. The basket here is put on by the hire company, and the rear rack that carries the battery. So that heavy black thing there is the battery, is designed so you can probably hang panniers off either side of it. I should expect you could certainly hang the Decathlon designed ones. The bolt is quite thick. I'm not sure about auto-libs, but you probably could. And then there's a second hanging point down there. So certainly there's the possibility to carry enough luggage to do. So what else can we say about it? Well, this is the battery. It's fairly substantial battery. It's quite heavy. The bike is heavy. It's one of the biggest downsizes. It's about 28 kilos before you put anything on it. That's heavy enough to make it pretty tough to lift over, say, low walls or something, and that would be a fairly big negative for me. But despite the weight of the battery, the range is actually quite limited. It's only the equivalent of a 300 watt battery on the Bosch system, and I typically travel with 500 watts. And you know, that's if you were going to do more modest distances, then it could be done. So next, let's think about where I think it's clearly worse, right? Well, one, the weight. Weight's definitely an issue. By the time you had this bike fully loaded, you'd probably be looking at 40 plus kilos, even with relatively modest kind of camping gear and stuff. The next thing is it's a rear motor, right? And with rear motor e-bikes, the system tends to be a lot less sophisticated, and I certainly notice when I'm cycling. So on my Rally Motors tour, when I'm cycling that, it feels like the motor is working with me as I increase the cadence or reduce it, speed the pedals go around at. The motor is coming in and out in a way that feels very, very smooth. On this, it's driving the rear wheel. There's only 3 settings. I think I have 5 altogether. And it feels much more like somebody shoving you along. So the electric assist is much cruder. Now, that's not just a question of how it feels, that's also a question of range, because that means it's putting in power when it doesn't need to. I'm probably pedaling hard enough, and so that would reduce the actual range I would get in practice. I'm certainly of the opinion that with my bike, as I've used it, I've been getting a longer range out of it, and I think that's because I've been getting more in sync with the motor. You know, there's this kind of subconscious aspect where you're in tune with that. The next thing that's a problem is the battery can be removed. That's good, so you can take it off to recharge it, say in a hotel room or something. However, the charger they give with you takes 4 to 5 hours to do a full charge on this battery. So that, with the fact that the battery's also a very limited range, means that in terms of charging time, I use a fast charger with the Bosch system. I'm almost getting 3 times as much range per hour of charging as I would be using this system. That would make wild camping, for instance, with this combination very much more difficult, because you know, you can't really hang around most pubs or restaurants for 5 hours trying to charge a battery up. That's not really going to work out very well. so that's a big consideration. Gears, they're okay, 6-speed, you know, on an e-bike you don't need loads of them. I've no particular complaints with that. The only other thing I wasn't keen on is the control system. There are only 3 settings, and I would call the 3 settings not enough, too much, and way too much. In that the lowest setting, you can feel the assist, it's definitely there. But once you start to hit any sort of hill at all, it feels like it's not enough. Now that's partially also due to the weight of the bike. But when you turn up to the middle setting, that's quite a shove, you know, and the thing is it's now draining battery much faster. And of course the top sport setting is even more so. So again, I think in terms of range, that's going to reduce the sort of range you're getting from this setup. So that 50 to 70 kilometers on the flat in good conditions could look very, very different if you're facing substantial hills, and I could easily see how instead you'd be talking about 30 or maybe 25. I won't have an opportunity on this holiday to check that out in practice. Maybe somebody else has, so I'd really appreciate any information on that in the comments. But the overall conclusion would be, if you've no other options, then yes, this will work. It will get you in a lot of circumstances, it will get you between B&Bs or hotels. I think because of the charging, that's the sort of place you're going to stay, or campsites that have charging facilities. It's heavy. That's going to make it a real pain to try and get it on and off a train, particularly if it's one of those ones where you have to hang it vertically. You know, trying to lift 28 kilos isn't a joke. And it doesn't feel anything like as pleasant to cycle as my Rally Motors Tour does. But as a set of compromises, again, it's about a third of the cost of it. And in fact, when you factor in me upgrading the battery from 400 to 500 watts, it's less than a third of the cost. So certainly if you already have one of these, if you're on a very tight budget and you're not sure if you really want to do cycle touring, then this is the sort of bike you could use to test it out with its limitations. So this is the control unit. Turns on here, you hold it down a couple of seconds and you can see those blue lights as it comes on. And then there's a mode button here. It starts off in the lowest assist level, which, as I said, is I would call not enough. You push the mode once, it goes up to the normal level, which to me is a little bit too much. You push it again, it goes up to sport. Push it again, it comes back down to normal. Push it again and it goes back to that minimum setting. There's also an indicator here showing you how much battery power you have left. I did about 20 kilometers on this coast cycle, which was mostly flat, but there was a strong wind yesterday, and that 20 kilometers took about 2/5 of the battery down. Now I was going up to the middle level quite a bit on that, so if you stayed at the lowest you'd have done a fair bit better on it. This is the battery setup. There's a charging port here, as you can see, so you can charge the battery on the bike. There's a power indicator here. You push that, gives you an instant readout of where you are. And then there's a lock mechanism there that enables you to unlock the battery and bring it into a hotel, for instance, to charge with. So by far the biggest limitation with trying to use this for touring is the battery. The battery is 313 equivalent watt hour battery. I use a 500 for touring. With my 500 I typically will get 100 kilometers out of it. So a simple conversion would say you should be getting 63, 64 easily enough out of this. However, Decathlon in the stats on the web say it's only it has a range of about 50 in flat conditions as well. So that's a surprisingly large reduction in terms of what I would expect. Possibly they're being conservative. They don't want to be selling the bikes and then have customers coming back because they're not getting 60 or not getting 70, which is more in terms of what I expect. But also possibly that's because of the rear hub and the cruder balancing it does between your legs providing power and the battery providing power. The only way of being sure about that would be to test it. In terms of the cycling I've done, I haven't
cycled it to a completely flat battery, but I would be expecting from the cycling I've done and watching the battery drain that I'd be getting near that 60 kilometers distance. So definitely the biggest drawback. You could get a second battery for it, but the battery is quite big and bulky, so I don't know really if you want to be carrying a second one of those around. I mean, you could. That would definitely solve that issue. I don't know how much that would cost you. But yeah, the biggest drawback, still doesn't make it impossible, and certainly you can do things like turn the battery off when you're going downhill or perhaps on the flat in order to maximize distance. So do a lot more battery nursing, you might get more distance. The long charging time, 5 hours, so about an hour charging per 10 kilometers, limits the sort of feasibility of stopping for lunch somewhere and getting enough of a charge to make much of a distance. But you probably could. You could probably get an extra 25k charge out of it, in particular because the way battery charging works, if it's fairly flat, the first 20 or 30% happens much faster than the last 10% basically does. But anyway, that's the biggest limitation on it. So I hope you found that review useful. If you did, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in my further e-bike touring adventures, do give the channel a follow and check out all the content I already have here.